dresses. They're so cute. And if we talk about how to put together this little girl's dress, we can also use that information to know how to basically serge and do a big girl's dress too. So we're going to explore some basic construction and some basic serging. We're using the Baby Lock Accolade and little girls' dresses. You may not have one to make, but surely you might want to make one for yourself. I'm Cathy. This is Sewing Tech Talk. Let's get to serging. So we are going to use the Baby Lock Accolade, and we're going to go over some basic garment construction and some basic serging. So first, I have a handout, and in the handout I do have the bodice pattern pieces for an adorable little size 2 dress. Now, you may not be wanting to make a little girl's dress in size 2. Any other size, or even a big girl's dress, simple patterns are super easy to find. Here's one. We're going to talk about doing a big girl's dress as well. It's just a very simple shell pattern. And like I said, they're very easily available for big girls, little girls, in just about whatever size you want. We're going to need to have the bodice pieces cut out, and for this little bodice, I actually have it fully lined. And surprisingly, having a fully lined bodice is actually kind of easier than just cutting a single one and turning the parts under. So what you're going to need, of course, is to cut out your front and your lining. In this little dress we're going to be making today, isn't this adorable? It's little strawberry fabric. And what you're going to need is you're going to need to cut out the front of the bodice, and in this case there are 2 back pieces cut as a mirror image. You'll need the exact same pieces cut as the lining. Now, this little bodice has an opening in the back. It could just as easily be an opening in the front. It's the same process. So we're going to go through the process of putting it together, and there are some tricks to getting it so that you can sew it all on the serger, fully lined, and it's actually surprisingly easy. Now, for this little dress, I have the serger set up for like the most basic simple seam of all, and that is a 3-thread narrow overlock. I'll tell you in a minute why I chose that one, but it's good to know that the Baby Lock Accolade is an 8-thread serger. What does that mean to you? That means there's an incredible variety of different seams that you can use on this machine. Because it can do an overlock stitch and a cover stitch, you can do them both at the same time and do a variety of different seams, from very bulky fabrics that want to ravel to very fine super sheer fabrics. And the machine can handle them all. So for this project, we really only need a 3-thread narrow. And how is the machine set up for that? Well, here's the Accolade, and there's 2 places I can place a needle for the overlock stitch. There's a left position and a right position. For the narrow one, we're just going to be using the right-hand position. I'm going to open up the machine, and I've threaded it with the upper looper, the lower looper, and a single thread coming through that right-hand needle. Now, in the controls down here, this large lower knob does the length of the stitch. I have it set about a 2, which is good for this kind of fabric. There's a stitch selector on the machine, A, B, C, and D. We have it set on B because we have the right-hand needle in the machine. You get a great quick reference guide with the machine. So for any stitch that you want to set up, and there's 86 different combinations, it's easy to set up the machine with the nice pictures, and it shows you all the different setup options that you have for setting up the machine. A little bit later, we're going to switch this machine over to a 4-thread, and it's super simple. Not only does it thread itself, but switching it over just takes a few minutes. We're going to use that for gathering the bodice, which is gathering the skirt, which is attached to the bodice. So now, let's get a little bit to construction. I'm going to close up the machine. And remember, we're ready to rock and roll with our 3-thread narrow overlock. I went ahead and I simply stitched the shoulder seams together. And I used that 3-thread narrow overlock to do it. I did that on the lining and I did that on the bodice. Now what we need to do is we need to put these two together, and we're going to sew it together in an order I kind of call flat construction. And what does that mean? That means everything is all laid out flat and it's super easy to manipulate. So what we're going to do is we're going to lay the two pieces right sides together. Now the trick is we want to sew as many seams as we possibly can and then turn this right side out and have it completely lined. So for this bodice with an opening in the back, that's pretty simple. We're really going to sew the neck, the back seams, and we're going to go ahead and sew the sides where it's a sleeveless bodice, so the sides right where the arm are. What we are not going to sew together is the side seams. I know you'd think you would do those first, or the bottom, because that's where we're going to attach the skirt. So let's put this together and just sew a few seams. I'm going to lay it right sides together. And if I need to, I have wonder clips that I can use to attach these pieces together. If I use pins when I'm serging, what I do is I place the pins well inside so I don't accidentally cut them with the blade. Now we're going to talk about basic serging. What happens is there's a cutting blade that you can have. You don't have to have it, but in this case we do. And I'm going to be serging up. Now, this particular little bodice has a seam allowance. Most of, just like all of your other little garments that you're going to put together. Some seam allowances are 5/8 inch, some of them are 1/2 inch. In this case, the seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch. So if I'm going to be cutting off, how do I know where my seam allowance is? Well, it's super simple. If I'm using the right hand needle, what I do is I use this right indicator on the front, and I'm going to have the raw edge coming right along the side of it so that I know I'm going to be trimming off some, but I'm going to end up with that finished 5/8 inch seam, even though it's not going to look like 5/8 inch when I'm done. You can also get a special seam guide for the machine that's really helpful if you don't want to eyeball from here to here. So now let's cut off let's serge this together and trim it, and it's going to look so good. Notice how I'm cutting off some, but I'm still going to have a finished allowance. What's important is that your seam be where your seam is supposed to be. So there's my first seam. Pretty professional. Now the one reason I really chose to use this 3-thread narrow seam is because I have a lot of curves on this little bodice. Now when you're sewing traditionally with a traditional sewing machine, you are going to be sewing that 5/8 inch seam, and that's going to be coming right along in here. Well, when you get finished, because you have a curve, you're going to have to come in with scissors and clip along that edge. It's called releasing the seam. Otherwise, when you turn it right side out, it gets all bunchy. So I want to eliminate that step. What I'm going to do is use my 3-thread narrow, and I found that I generally do not have to clip and release the seam. It saves me a lot of time, and the little garment, it looks professional too. So let's line everything up. We're going to line together our shoulder seams, and we're going to sew around. Now, when you're serging, the one basic serging function is, when you're coming up to a curve, you want to sew it as straight as possible. Why? Because you have a blade. If I was going to continue straight along here, obviously I'd cut into my fabric. So one of the tricks is bring your fabric up and around, and you're going to try to sew it as straight as possible. Just take your time. Once you get the hang of it, it's really pretty easy to do. So now I've done the shoulder seams, and I went around the neck and the back on the one side. Obviously I have to finish that other side. But let me show you the other trick when it comes to doing the arm eye, because we want this lining to be a little tiny bit smaller than this outside. Why? Well, when we turn it right side out, we want that outside fabric to go around to the outside edge, just a tiny bit. So here's the cool trick. When I'm doing this side, here's this side. Let me grab my clip. Hold on. Here we go. What I want to do is, from the right-hand side, I want to make sure that this fabric on the inside, the lining, comes a little bit farther out than the raw edges being together. That means I'm going to trim off a little bit more of that inside lining. And when I turn it to the right side, well, that means it's going to be just a tiny bit smaller, and it's going to easily flow to the back. So let me get this lined up, and we're going to do the one side seam, and I want to show you the magic. So there's one side of my little bodice. Obviously, I have to finish the other. Now remember, we did not do the side seams, and let me show you why. Well, what we need to do is we need to turn this little bodice right side out. And it's super easy because you have this one side over here. All I do is I take the bodice, and of course I'm going to do the other side also, but I turn it right side out through this little hole. Let me find it here. So you're going to go from this side here, pull it through, and it's going to completely line not only the sleeve but the neckline of this little bodice. Pretty cool, right? It's actually much faster than just turning that edge under, although the machine could do that as well. So there it is. Now, of course, I'm going to take it to the iron and nicely press it. This side seam hasn't been done. This is how simple it is. All you do is you take your little bodice, and now you bring the side seams up just like this and put them together just like that and sew across there. Now this is just a little bodice, right? It's going to have the skirt attached to the bottom. But what if I'm doing a big girl's dress, or I'm doing a shift where it's all one piece? Well, this side seam can be as long as you want. These bodice pieces can be as long as you want. It can be an entire shift. It makes a great nightgown, and when I'm putting that lining in, it makes it really comfortable and really easy to wear. So basically, all I have to do, bring these two side pieces together, sew across here, and of course do it for the other side. Now, you have a handout, and I go through all these steps in the handout. And I also give you the pattern for the bodice of this little size 2. So check out the handout. If you go to moors.com/shop, go to the very bottom, and all my handouts are there. And it might be helpful to have instructions so you don't have to take notes. So that's how you do a bodice with an opening either in the front and the back. But what if you have a dress or a shift that doesn't have an opening in the front and the back? Well, there's one trick that you have to do, and it's a little bit different than doing this. There's a different step. You're going to do the arms one at a time. Let me show you. Well, I'm making this dress, and it's a basic sleeveless shift, just like I was doing with that little bodice. It's just a little bit longer, and it's for a big girl, not a little girl. This fabric is really pretty. It's a beautiful ponte knit with some holes that are already stamped in it. So obviously, I have to fully line it. So that means that the top of the dress goes all the way down, and the lining goes all the way down too. But the process, well, the process is very much the same, except for one thing. There's no opening in the front, and there's no opening in the back. So if I was to sew both of the armholes like I did with my little bodice, there's no way to turn it right side out. Or is there? Well, basically, here's the cool trick, and you might be kind of surprised. What I need to do is I need to take the garment from the right side, bring everything over to the top of that seam, and then the lining is just going to come over the top and enclose it. Kind of like a little taco or a little burrito. So the entire garment has been put through that one shoulder seam. Obviously, you need a bigger shoulder to make this accomplished, but you can do it. So what I need to do is the same thing I did on that other little bodice, is to put pins all the way here, well, not pins, clips all the way here, and just sew my arm's eye. Basically, it's going to look just like that. And remember the trick, I want this lining to be a little bit on the outside than it was on the other. So then I pull it all the way through. I just do one side at a time. Pretty slick trick, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this all pinned up or clipped up, go ahead and sew it together, and when I come back, I'm going to show you how I attach the bodice to that little top. I have another one started. So we're going to attach the bodice to the skirt on that little dress. We're going to show you how simple it is to change the Accolade from a 3-thread to a 4-thread, because you can do some tricky little stuff getting the most perfect gathers you'd ever want to see. So let me get this done, and I'll be right back, and we'll switch the machine over to gather that skirt to my little bodice. Okay, so I sewed that together. Wasn't that a cool trick where you put everything into the shoulder seam? Now remember, we had to do that because this doesn't have an opening in the front and the back. With this little bodice, I could easily pull this part through there. But on this big girl's dress, I had to modify and just do a shoulder at a time. But the trick still works. Everything pulls through. It's just kind of like magic. You're just pulling a dress on through, and who knew you had the most beautiful finished sleeves and neckline. Pretty slick trick, right? Now remember, for this, you sew the side seams last. On the little bodice, I put them together just like this. On this big dress, it's just the same. The seams are just longer. So what I would do is take it, bring them together, and line everything up. And I'm going to be sewing the side seam of the dress, and then the side seam of the lining. Pretty slick, right? So that's pretty easy to finish the dress. The bodice needs to be finished with a little skirt. So let me talk to you a little bit about how I did that. Remember, the instructions are in your handout. And if you get a pattern, they might have you do it just a tiny little bit differently than I do. But this process works for any sleeveless garment, and you can line it. Now, this garment, like I said, it has holes in the fabric, so obviously I had to line the whole thing. But remember, if you're doing a dress, something like this, you do not have to line the whole thing. What if you lined it only partially coming down to here? And then, even at the bottom, you could even insert some elastic. It's easy to do with the Accolade Serger. There's other videos for that. So you don't have to fully line it, but actually doing the bodice, doing this top part with the arms and the neckline, it's super simple. But let's get to that skirt. So now here's my skirt, and let me bring out my little dress that I made previously and show you how I did the back. So here's the back. I closed it with some snaps. It could easily be buttons. And I did put a bow on. Actually, this bow, there's a video, and I did a video called Ruffles and Bows on the Baby Lock Serger, and it shows you how to make this adorable bow. Now this bow, this waistband, I put it on with a snap also, because if you ever tried to keep a bow on a 2-year-old, I'm just saying. So now, on the inside of the dress, what we have is we have the skirt that goes around to the back. And we're just going to leave an opening up here. But I want to put the skirt onto the bodice. But let me show you on this one that I'm working on. And I'm going to bring it up so that you can see. What I did is I extended the skirt a little bit beyond into the lining of the bodice. Why? Well, that turns this part to the back so that when I finish it, it's going to form a little facing on the back that gives me room to close that. Was that a little bit confusing? Look at the handout. Go ahead and print it. I have all kinds of pictures that are going to show you what I'm talking about. This part that goes going to flow to the back, well, I don't want that part to be gathered. And it's simple to do on the machine. So let me show you that. Now with the Baby Lock Accolade and any other of the Baby Lock Sergers, you can get a special ruffling foot. And here's the ruffling foot. What this ruffling foot can do is it can sew a flat piece of fabric and gather the other piece that it's sewing to it. And I could use that on this bodice. But here's the issue. I want it to be gathered specifically. I want it to be gathered exactly where I want it to be. Like I said, I don't want it gathered on either end. So I have a trick to help you. So we're going to ruffle the fabric. It's going to do a great job. We are going to use the ruffling foot because it does have that little tongue that sticks down that really gets you that extra gather. But if I sew this with not a 3-thread but a 4-thread, I can use that extra thread to really specifically put my gathers where I want. But we need to switch this machine over from a 3-thread narrow to a 4-thread. And it's incredibly simple on the Accolade. Most other sergers, you're going to have to re-thread the whole entire machine. Not true with this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a couple tricks. Now, I have the right hand needle in. I'm going to move that over to the left hand position. It's a quick way to switch between a 3-thread narrow and a 3-thread wide. Now, I could just as easily put that left hand needle in and put another thread in there, but I'm going to make this thread that I'm going to pull together a different color so you can see it. So I don't have to rethread the whole thing. So let's take this needle with the thread still in it and move it over to the left-hand position. All I'm going to do is loosen the needle, take it out of the slot, and move it over to the next slot over. Slide it on in. And tighten it up. Now I didn't take the thread out, right? Well, that thread is coming through this slot right here because this slot's for the left needle and this slot's for the right needle. I'm just going to move the thread over. I'm going to take the thread, pull it out, and lay it in the new slot. Pretty simple, right? Didn't have to rethread the entire serger. Now I do want a needle back in that right hand position. But if I was to serge right now, all I have to do is take my stitch selector, move it to A, because that means I have the left needle in, and I'd be doing a 3-thread wide. Let's add that other thread and needle so I can do a 4-thread. The Baby Lock Serger uses an EL705 needle. And a lot of needles come with your machine, but if you're going to get extra needles, there's the needles you want to get. Let's take one and put it in that right hand position and get it threaded up. Now when you put both of your needles into a serger, they're never going to be even across the bottom. That's another basic serging trick. With the Baby Lock Accolade, you get an owner's manual, which is great. But you can also get what's called an inspiration guide. And the inspiration guide has big pictures that shows you exactly where everything goes. So it's nice to be able to see and know exactly that you put your needles in right. Now let's take that other thread. I'm just going to use a white thread so that you can kind of see that it's a little bit different. I would normally be using a red thread. So let's take this thread, bring it on up, and put it in that slot that we took the other thread out of. A needle threader comes with the machine. It's a cute little needle threader that looks just like this. This little heart goes on the top. I'm going to take my thread, lay it across the needle threader just like that, place it on the front of the needle, gently press it forward and slide it down the needle. It's going to push that thread right through the eye of the needle. Now, I've threaded my other needle, I've inserted it. If I hadn't been talking, I could have switched this machine over to a 4-thread from a 3-thread narrow, just like that. All I had to do is put the other needle in. Remember, I did push that one needle over, didn't have to, but I wanted to not have to thread my needles twice. Make sense? So now, let's gather up this bodice. It's going to be a simple process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change over to the ruffling foot because it's going to help me get a little bit extra gathers. To do that, I'm going to take the other foot off and slide this foot on. Now we're going to start to serge right along the edge of the top of this skirt. This front part here, I don't really necessarily want to have gathered. Even though I have the gathering foot on, it's going to be just fine. I haven't engaged what's called my differential feed. So let's just serge for a little bit with our 4-thread and so I serged for a little bit. And this is the part that's going to go backwards when I put that little skirt on. And it's not going to be a gathered part. Now, let's go to gather. And gathering is super simple. The Baby Lock Accolade has what's called a differential feed, which means there's 2 sets of feed dogs, and I can make them work independently of each other. If I have the front set going faster, it's going to gather this fabric just beautifully. How do I set it up? Well, on the machine, on the side of the machine over here, I have a big end for neutral, no gather, and that's what my lever's set at for right now. There's even a cool picture on the top that shows me this is how you gather. So I'm going to put my lever all the way up to that, but I could gather a little bit less if I chose to. Down here, if I push the lever all the way down here, it stretches the fabric out, and that's how I get a lettuce seam. A lettuce edge. So now, here we go. Let's gather up this fabric, and the machine's going to do most of the work. So I've come to the edge of my little skirt. And it's gathered really well. I'm going to show you that. But I don't want to gather this part. It's so simple. I simply take the lever and put it back to in for neutral, no gathering, normal, and just sew off the rest. Look at how perfectly that gathered. Let me show you up close. So here's the gathering, and this is going to be sewn to the bottom part of my little bodice. Now, it gathered really well, but maybe it didn't gather enough. I can adjust those gathers, and let me show you how. I changed this thread to a white thread, and you can see that's that thread from the right-hand needle coming down. I'm going to find that white thread right over here on the end, give it a little pull, and just like you would be gathering if you sewed with a sewing machine, I can adjust the gathers here and make them fit exactly where I need to be. Now I'm making them fit evenly to the bottom of this bodice, but what if you're doing something special where you want just certain gathers here and here? Well, I can adjust that differential feed just when I get to those spots, or I can pull up this one thread to make it absolutely perfect. So let's pull up some additional gathers. See how I can make it just better, more gathers than I want. I can gather this absolutely perfectly to fit the little bottom of my bodice. Now when I'm sewing this to my bodice, the instructions are in your handout. But what you're going to do is you're going to sew it. Let me grab my little bodice right here. After, of course, you sew the side seams, you're going to sew the bottom part of it to the bodice. That lining, you're going to leave it free except on the ends. Check your handout for how that looks. Distribute them evenly. You can leave it on a 4 thread, take it off of gathering if you've left it on there, and just sew the 2 pieces together. When I do the hem, well, there's another video I've done for that called the bottom edge. So you can do multiple hems. You could even make this fancy. There's another video, heirloom sewing on the serger. I hope you can see that this serger, well, it can do a tremendous amount of different things. You can quilt, you can do garments, home decor. There's a ton of stuff it can do. So I'm going to send it off to George. This is the Baby Lock Accolade. It's an 8-thread serger. Overlock, cover stitch, any combination of the two, and anything you want to do. Fast, easy, professional. Oh, tell them a little bit more, George.
Thanks, Kathy. As always, that was an incredible presentation. The Baby Lock Accolade is quite an amazing serger. It combines both a cover hem and a serger all in one, with such exclusive features that Baby Lock's known for, like air threading, but auto thread delivery eliminates the need for tension, so you can sew on all different types of fabric with different thread, and all you do is know your ABCs. You select the dial based on the suggested setting, and everything is perfect for you. And I love that about Baby Lock. But the fact that you can sew all 8 threads for ruffling or working with the decorative wave stitch, it truly is a top-of-line serger. And we have an incredible buy on this here. The Baby Lock Accolade has a package retail value of $5,744. Right now, we have it on sale for $34.99. We're offering interest-free payments as well as free shipping across the country. But wait, there's a bonus. So right now, we're including the Baby Lock Accolade Inspirational Guide. This gives you full color, step-by-step instructions to do virtually everything that this serger does. And it does a lot. We're also including a selection of Madeira Aerolock thread, as well as 6 Baby Lock accessory feet, which includes the ruffler foot, elastic foot, one for sewing lace, piping, and more. Besides that, you get a membership to Baby Lock Love of Knowledge. This is a very comprehensive training portal where there are videos on how to operate this serger, as well as doing techniques on a serger in general and using accessories. This total value of the bonus is nearly $350, and it's included with the Baby Lock Accolade for a limited time. So give us a call at 1-800-865-9664 or click on the link to purchase the Accolade today.